There we go. Goodness me. Well, most of us are here now. I imagine certain people coming all the way from Mississauga are having an even tougher time. So, for your benefit, we record the session. No, I was a little bit later because I had to drop back out to pick up the camera. I appreciate your patience. At least the temperature in here is not yet.
Someone must have complained.
So when was it that you guys were going to write your exam? Tomorrow? Cool. Hopefully y'all are able to get there on time.
Any tips?
For the exam? I tried to not be as hard as the term.
Okay. I'll take that.
Well, like, the attempt is, I can attempt it all I want, but if it actually doesn't end up happening, you know, you're never quite sure how a class is going to take the test, you know. But, tried focusing a bit more on the conceptual stuff, if that makes sense. So. Yep.
I'll take that. Perfect.
So let's see here. Oh yeah, somebody keeps changing settings. Not my settings, the settings. It's not like my personal settings. There we go. All right. So, last week we talked about HTML. HTML, in theory, isn't too bad. You have to get used to the idea that your editing environment is no longer WYSIWYG. You guys know what WYSIWYG stands for? What you see is what you get. This is the operational sort of UI paradigm that such software as the Microsoft Office suite operates with. You guys, I heard you mention you're doing like a UI class. Well, sooner or later that word's probably going to come up. This is generally considered, you know, good end user experience design, WYSIWYG. But since all of you are, hey, you made it.
Yes.
Come on in. We actually started not too long ago.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, so
Okay.
I was also pretty late.
It's the traffic was extremely bad.
Yeah.
And the weather was
Like 3 snowflakes and everybody forgets how to drive, am I right?
yes, and people intentionally slow down a little bit, and some people are speeding and some people are. I don't know.
Well, like I do understand, like, knocking 10, 20 clicks off your speed and weather layers. I think that's a necessary safety.
That's fine, but
Yeah.
some people are speeding like too much and they're
Yeah.
changing lanes and then,
It's the inconsistency that's the problem.
yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, welcome. I was actually just getting started. Last week was HTML. This week, CSS. I explained the WYSIWYG acronym. What you see is what you get. Microsoft Word is WYSIWYG because when you print it out, it looks pretty much the same way as when you type it in. HTML is not, because we've got a lot of stuff going on in HTML that the characters do not appear on the final website. Things like your paragraph tag or your image tag, these are substituted for other things once the website is actually rendered. So, we are going to talk about cascading style sheets. Also, we will talk about responsive design. Responsive design is a design principle that has been seeing increasing, not even just popularity, but it is the way that things are done now in a web development sense. So here's a question. What sorts of devices do people look at websites most on? Precisely so. Most people are looking at your website on a tablet or a smartphone, some mobile device these days. They are overwhelmingly the largest share of devices viewing web pages, right? So, you don't usually design your website on a smartphone, however. You will typically be using a good old desktop with a computer keyboard with buttons by them, because I don't care what anybody says, nobody types as fast on a touchscreen as they do on one of these bad boys. And when you are a programmer, speed and efficiency is good. So, basically, the idea behind responsive design is that your website should respond to whatever device it's being displayed on. This mostly comes down to screen width. So let me show you some little aspect of responsive design right now. So you see how this table of items, right? When I pull the window into a narrower aspect ratio, something similar to what you would see on a smartphone. This is like your quick and dirty way of testing smartphone widths, is to just take your browser window and pull it in. You'll notice that this stuff all remains the same size and is still perfectly readable. What's changed is the width of this table, right? It's changed in response so that other pieces of the website don't have to. And it goes from sort of easy things to hard things, right? You'll notice on desktop widths, your home page for Canvas. Well, yeah, this is an instructor home page, so it has a couple of things that yours won't. For example, I've got like a little pane that tells me what things I have to grade, like right over here. I don't have anything to grade right now because it's so early in the semester and I'm not yet as behind as I usually am. Ha 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 ha. But you have a little thing that pops down on this side telling you what's what. It's useful, right, to have it right at the top there. But watch what happens if I pull in a narrower aspect ratio. The other way that you can do this dynamically is by using the inspector pane to sort of adjust the screen width as you go. You see right there? You see how my canvas thing disappears? Well, it hasn't disappeared. What it's done is it's just jumped to the bottom, right? That is known as a breakpoint. And breakpoints are a very important element of responsive design. Basically, the tendency in responsive design is you put things side by side under wide screen widths, but when things get too narrow, you take them and you stack them up vertically rather than having them out width-wise. Does that make sense? Now, you might be saying to yourself, gee, this sounds complicated, but don't worry, because there are libraries that we use to assist ourselves in this kind of design. Most particularly, it's called Bootstrap. And we will be studying how to integrate it into websites while we go through the other CSS stuff. Does that make sense? So that's a little summary of responsive design for you. So let me talk now somewhat briefly on cascading style sheets. So CSS is meant to style the elements of an HTML page. When we started studying HTML last week, you'll remember that I was saying that in HTML you want simply and purely what the contents of the website are. You are not so much concerned with how things look. You do some layout, but a lot of it is just the bare, what do I want on the page, and what order should it appear in. With CSS, we are now applying style properties to various elements of a web page. Style properties. In fact and in truth, all of the style properties which we will be modifying through our CSS examples, all of these can be done at the level of individual HTML elements themselves. We can apply style attributes to individual page elements. For example, if I had a paragraph tag and I wanted the text of the paragraph to be read, I could declare a style parameter of that paragraph tag and then use the magic string to turn it red, which we'll get into. This is not the preferred way of going about things for a number of reasons. It's kind of your quick and dirty, I want to see what something looks like way of doing things, but not your proper programming way of doing things. For one thing, your styling rules will often be applicable to multiple HTML pages on your website, right? Rare is the case where you would have a web application with only one HTML page. You would have to be doing something really, really, really simple. Or something really, 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 really complicated. There's kind of like, a gulf in the middle. Like, either everything you need to say with the website can be said in one page, or you're doing some kind of like extremely, extremely programmatic, like social media thing that's fetching everything that's important from a database. And even then, you're probably going to have different HTML pages for like settings pages, and profile pages, and that sort of thing. Even if, something like the platform formerly known as Twitter, something like that might have a surprisingly small number of actual HTML pages because the content is being generated dynamically using database contents. This is something we will eventually get to in class and sort of study how these techniques are performed. So it's kind of like, that's kind of how you would imagine it. But anyway, it's most of the time going to be the case that you will have multiple HTML pages. Now, if you are going through and individually styling every single element in a page, that takes a heck of a long time, and it's prone to error, and we want some mechanism of abstraction the same way that we use methods and functions in programming, right? We want to be able to say it once and have that apply in several places. This is the idea behind the CSS styling rule. There are two places that you can put styling rules. Number one, inside of a special HTML element called a style element. These normally are placed in the head of an HTML file. Don't worry, we're going to have plenty of examples. We normally put the style block inside of the head of the HTML file, and it applies only to the file in which it occurs. Alternatively, we may take our CSS rules and externalize them into their own CSS file. So if we take our styling rules and put them into their own file, rather than attaching them inside of the HTML file, those CSS rules can be used by multiple HTML files. HTML files link to style sheets. When you take CSS rules and you put them in their own file, they are often called style sheets. So if you externalize the CSS, you can load that from multiple HTML pages, and then if you have to make a modification, you make it once in one file, and it applies for everything. This is the way that we prefer to do things in programming. We are reducing the complexity of what we're doing. But of course, we trade one form of complexity for another, right? One of the things that's true about cascading style sheets, they are written such that they target some elements, and we write a phrase that targets certain elements. Then we have a number of styling rules that are applied. It is possible to write CSS styling rules that conflict with each other, right? If two rules target overlapping sets of HTML elements, the question becomes, whose styling rules do you apply? And this is the C in the CSS. Cascading style sheets. So the C, cascading, is a description of how the CSS rules will overwrite each other. There are some rules of precedence. Generally speaking, things which are specified more locally take precedence over things specified less locally. Things which are more specific will tend to take precedence over things less specific. But we have plenty of time to take a look at all of that. So, let's dive into the slides, shall we? It used to be you could get away without this stuff in web programming, but that's really not the case anymore. CSS is an essential part of modern web design. So, what is CSS and what role does it play on a website? It stands for Cascading Style Sheets. CSS is focused on the presentation, that is, style, look, layout, etc., of a document written in HTML. So, an important an important concept as we go through web programming will be the separation of concerns. One thing that's very, very important if you wish to be, doing any kind of programming for a living is you need to get a handle on the separation of concerns. Separation of concerns is what allows you to write a function, because you've taken a certain functionality, you've said, this does that, and it does nothing else, and that, this is the little box in which I solve that problem. I'm going to solve different problems in different boxes, and then propose the solutions together. In this case, structure is derived from HTML. Presentation is derived from CSS. So, if you are writing your HTML with a mind to presentation, you're doing it wrong. And if you're writing your CSS with a mind to structure, you're doing it wrong. It's a little harder to go the other way. So, both HTML and CSS have their own domains, and your job as the programmer is to respect the division of labor between them. Does this make sense? Both HTML and CSS are what we call in programming domain-specific languages, or DSLs. The purpose of a DSL is to solve one problem well. This is different from the programming that we studied in fundamentals. C# is a general purpose programming language. Even though, if you pull that into a Unity context, that starts looking like a very specific domain. C# is for general programming problems. HTML, CSS, and many of the other languages that we are going to be studying have been designed for and cater to very specific programming problems. Hence, they are called domain-specific languages. So why do this? Why separate out our structure from our style? Well, number one, it makes things easier to reason about as they scale. So it may not be such a problem for one of our stupid little in-class examples, right? But if you are working on a real website, which is large enough, consider something that's not even a particularly large website, such as Mohawk's website, right? That is sufficiently large that if you don't take some consideration in the early phases for how things will look once they're at scale, you end up shooting yourself in the foot several times. Basically, every single time you write a style attribute for an individual HTML element, you are shooting yourself in the foot about, once for every time you have to look at that thing, which may be, 50, 60, 70 times. So just, do not shoot yourself in the foot. That's the idea. They also allow us to present the same markup page with different styles for different situations. This is also an important thing to realize. If we have style sheets, which are, abstracted out of the HTML, there's no reason we can't swap them around depending, situationally. Desktop versus mobile, for instance. So, CSS is a set of rules. Each rule has one or more selectors. This is the syntax and structure of a CSS rule. This is a CSS rule. In addition, it has a declaration block containing one or more declarations. Selectors specify to which elements the declarations and in the declaration block will apply. Below, is code which will make any heading to tags in the document have a red text and blue background color. You'll see we are selecting all H2 elements. Color is red, background color is blue. Now, in my opinion, one of the trickier things about CSS is the tag names themselves. Basically, you kind of just have to memorize a bunch of them, or have like a reference table, reference sheet. CSS. Printable. Here we go. Something like this. My recommendation is that you find one of these style sheet PDFs, images, print it out and post it wherever it is you do your work, right? This way, you always have your handy desktop reference for, what it is you actually want to do. You can even use like little sticky arrows to highlight the ones that you use commonly, that sort of thing. So yeah, that's my recommendation for helping to just come to grips with all of the different tags. Another thing that can be helpful is that certain code editors, such as VS Code, will auto-complete a certain number of, they will auto-complete style tags to a degree. Of course, this is not so much as you want them. You do have to get at least, a couple characters correct in order to get a drop down. So if you're hunting around for something, it's maybe not the best, but still can be very helpful. So if you haven't got that open already, please launch VS Code. And we'll take a look at this. Let's see. 16-04. So, once you've got VS Code open, let's create a new file. Let's call it example1.html. There we go. So, does anybody remember our shortcut to insert the boilerplate?
It's exclamation mark tab shifts.
Yes. Exclamation mark tab. Shift 1 tab. CSS. So let's just make a little bit of website contents, just like so. Let's make H1. This is an example website. Paragraph. This is a paragraph. Footer. a few of those in. Maybe an ordered list. List item. Iron ore. Iron plate. Steel. Low density structure. Heat Now, let's recall how we view a website. I'm just going to pop this over in that side of the screen. Right-click on the tab of the file. Reveal in File Explorer. There it is. Double-click. And there we have it. Making sense so far? Perhaps give people a moment to get something looking like this up. Cool. All right. So, let us now apply some styling. I will demonstrate all three ways of doing it, starting with the bad way. So the way that you do this, the bad way to do this, is to use inline styling tags. In general, do not submit inline styling tags for your assignments. I will be looking for them, and I will mark you down for using them, because it's bad and bad form, and don't do it. That being said, here's how you do it. You write the word style, and then you provide whichever of these declarations you wish, like, the declarations as they appear inside of these blocks are the same as how they appear in this string. So, for example, color red. I didn't put the little red square in there. That's something VS Code added because it knows what I'm doing. So note, important piece of syntax. You have property name, property value. If you want multiple properties, those are separated by semicolons. So if I wanted color is red and background color is blue, you'll notice I've got a lot of different background properties which have popped up. Most of these we don't care about. Background color. This is slightly interesting though. This is your list of all of your CSS color names. You'll find in many sort of programming languages, programming instances, these have gradually become the standard names for these colors across many different platforms. This is a very popular naming convention. So, for example, if you ever want launched that's the color. You'll get it most places. Like when you import color libraries, this is often what you'll see, especially in languages like Java. You know, corn silk, yeah, cornflower blue, cadet blue, dark cyan, dark, dim gray with an A and an E. There you go. Ghost white. Ooh. So you know, how about olive? Just to make this look as bad as possible. Save that up. Now, of course, when I save it here, that doesn't automatically change it here. This page needs to still be reloaded. So, Control R. There you have it. Horrible. Ugly as all heck. I will change the background color just because that is really, truly awful. To the Hello World of CSS colors, Alice Blue. Honestly, that's like the one that's used in like all the textbook examples and such. Alice Blue particularly. I don't know who Alice is or why this blue is pertaining to her. I've thought perhaps that sometimes it's like Alice from Alice in Wonderland.
I think that's her dress color, so probably.
Yeah. See, I would have thought that it would have been like deeper than that if you're going by the Disney character. Like the blue is somewhat more blue with a white apron, you know, but at any rate. So that's how you apply inline styling. Don't ever do it.
Don't ever do it why?
It overrides rules. So you don't want to have to do that everywhere, right? Imagine instead of having one heading to do, you had 50. Imagine you were a long Wikipedia article, right? That's just not going to cut it, right?
So it's better to have a CSS separate file sheet.
Yes.
And
Yeah. Basically, what will happen is you will be working for your company thinking you're doing a very good job. You know, look at all the work I'm doing. Look at all these modifications to the file. And your boss is coming along and saying, are you still playing with the color on the headings? You know? People get fired over that sort of thing. If you spend a day doing something that you should be able to do in 5 minutes, you know? So anyway, that being said, every once in a while this does come in handy, right? Like in exceptional circumstances, you do occasionally want to override the rules with something local, but there's always a better way to do it. So, let's now consider the style block. The style block usually gets declared in the head because it applies to the whole file, usually at the end, towards the end of the head, but it doesn't actually matter where you put it. Inside here, we can write fully fledged CSS styling rules. For example, targeting paragraph elements. I would like to make all of my paragraphs have a border which is 2 pixels solid and between. There you have it. Again, I'm not going for aesthetics here, but there you have it. So this introduces the idea of a compound rule. Border is modifying three properties here, not just one, right? We are modifying border width, border color, and border style, I guess. Each one of these properties can be addressed separately. Border dash color, green, border dash style, and it even gives you all of the different, border styles you can use. Let's see what double looks like. And border radius, or border width. Yeah, width will do. Let's make it 20 pixels. There you go. Right? So, in certain CSS styling tags, you always kind of follow this hyphen convention. You'll have like general property, more specific property separated by a hyphen. If you leave off the hyphenated bit, it allows you to modify multiple different properties at the same time in the same line. Generally speaking, though, those properties need to not be in conflict with each other. For example, border radius allows you to round the corners, but it takes the same sort of literal as border width does. So obviously those can't be both modified on the same line, and border will default to width as that's the one you want more frequently, right? Incidentally, rounding your corners is a good principle in user interface design. In general, this is just like a fact of human psychology. Human beings find round shapes more appealing than sharp ones, right? People like, squares, nobody likes them. Circles, everybody likes them. This actually informs like the design of cartoon characters as well. Generally speaking, even, cartoon characters that are ostensibly square aren't actually that square if you look at them. Like, for example, SpongeBob SquarePants. If you take a look at him, right? He's ostensibly a square, and his pants are square, but they're almost like a comedic contrast to the rest of the character, which is very rounded and curved out, right? Like, you'll see that on his actual face, which is most of his body, you don't actually have any sharp edges occurring anywhere at all. So there you go, user interface. Use rounded edges wherever possible. Good. Any questions about that? Yes?
Is P block is applied to all paragraphs, but
Yes.
I want just one paragraph, then how can I do it?
Two ways to do it. So basically, the question is, if I want to apply this to only one and not all of my paragraphs, how do I go about doing it? Now, and you may note already, this would be a pain to write in line, right? When you're doing in line, doing more than one or two properties, it makes the lines very long and difficult to work with, right? So it's nice even at that level to pop it outside. We have to get more specific. I'm sure that we have slides coming up on it, so let me see. Yes, here we go. So, you remember IDs and classes. Yeah. So HTML tags, any type of HTML tag, can be given both an ID and classes. IDs are unique, or at least they're supposed to be. It's a violation of coding standards in various ways to include IDs that are not unique. Basically, your HTML validator will fail, but it will still render the website. I think it'll take the second. Whatever the most recent ID is, that's the one it actually uses. Secondly, classes may be used to group together multiple elements in a document. So classes do not have the restriction of being unique identifiers. You can have multiple elements that all share one class. CSS can use IDs and classes to select a specific element or group of elements. So, with the CSS selector, we introduce two additional characters. If you use the pound symbol, known technically as octofork, that means you're specifying an ID. If you use the period, that means that you are specifying a class. So, for example, I'm just going to do a couple of them here. So ID is equal to 0.1. ID here is class here is equal to green background. Class is equal to green background. If I then produce style rules, 0.1, I don't know, let's make color to chartreuse. And if I make class green background into background color will be forest green. Chartreuse will show up terribly on white, so I'm going to modify that to navy. There we go. There we go. You have the text color on
Isn't
That's
necessary
second.
to say L I dot L I
No.
Instead
I'm getting there. Let me just look at that because okay. Well, you'll find that often, okay, so this is actually a decent point here. Can't be read, but that's okay. Not all style attributes apply to all element types, right? and the interpretation of a property is dependent on what the HTML element is. Does that make sense? So, for example, text color does not apply to list items. In order to apply text color to a list item, the way that the internet recommended I do that is to create a span inside of the list element, which can itself be styled the way that you would expect it to be. We can move the ID over. There we go. Or is it, did I just choose a color that's stupid? Yeah, I'm sorry. My bad. I just chose a color that's like indistinguishable from black at that level. So, I wonder if that was the problem the whole time. Let me see here. Okay, so that's the difference. So you see how the 1 is now red? Right? That's what happens when you apply the style to the whole list item. But if you want just the text and not the number, then you put a span around this and then color it out.
But when I change, I can do that without two, right? I can do it without a two.
Yes, but the difference is,
Why should I put span if I can do that? Just you did it initially.
let me show you the difference. There is actually a difference in how it looks in the end. Now everything's gone away. Wow. Okay. So this one is using the span, this one is not using the span. Here, the number does not inherit color, but here it does. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So if you want to just change the, okay, if you want to change the entire thing, then you don't use the span, but if you use the span, it's gonna change the entire line, basically, right? Okay.
And that makes sense with what those tags are supposed to mean as well. Because LI means list item. So when we are coloring a list item, we are coloring the entire list item, right? Including the number. Whereas when we put a span in, the span applies properties only to those things occurring inside of the tags. In this case, that's only the word, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, the question then becomes, class, green, background. let's say, just for the sake of interest, this green background property should look slightly different depending on whether it's being applied to a list item or to a paragraph. But semantically, we want them both to be included in the same class. There are reasons you might want to do this as well for like JavaScript later on, right? We can further specify by including combinations of elements, classes, and IDs. IDs are unique, so in theory you would never have to use anything else other than just the ID, but with classes and HTML elements it makes more sense. So, for example, list item dot green background. That's one color. Paragraph dot green background. We can choose something else. And you can see that those two are differentially applied. They are both, like all three of these elements are included in the green background class, which is not a class in the object-oriented sense. But because we have one rule for list items and another rule for paragraphs, we can differentiate those two out. In addition, we can assign non-conflicting properties to all of them. So, for, let me think here. What's a property we can apply? Oh. Margin left 10%. Right? So the margin property, another reason to include both of these things in the same class, even though we want them to be different shades of green, is that this still allows us to set different properties which do not conflict with this. If we chose it so that it conflicted with those other ones, we would run into rule conflicts, which are generally, you want to avoid them. But you can still set non-overlapping properties collectively using just the class. Does that make sense? So far, so good? Doing okay? Yeah? Okay. Let me show you what happens though.
Just one question. Somehow mine is not working.
Okay.
I don't know. It's worked till this, and I tried to change all of it.
Okay, can you go back? Oh, list item. Okay. Yep. Try reloading the page. Go back to your HTML. Did you save it? Go back again. Reload. Weird.
wording.
Hmm.
Should I close it and reload it again?
May I take a look? It may not be this. That went over it, but this paragraph is not showing. Oh, that's because you didn't include it, you didn't put class in.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah. There's always a reason. So,
May I have a question?
yes, absolutely.
Yeah, you wrote to 10% as margin left. I know the pixel units, but 10% to where does it come from?
10% of the screen width.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah, that's, it will automatically calculate a lot of stuff. In fact, according to the principles of responsive design, you really should be using percentages and not pixels. Like, pixels are fine if you're doing something like a border, but if it's supposed to be some reasonable part of the screen, like watch this, right? That 10% is 10% as I modify the screen width, right?
Oh, it shows there, okay.
Make sense? And that's like, as responsive design goes, that's like the bare bones basics. Good.
Can you scroll down a little bit on the floor and, yeah, I just want to see something here.
Sure.
I'm sorry, would you please explain again the first line of LI and proof line? So ID is included in the LI elements, and first one is ID is in span elements.
Yes. So an ID can occur in any HTML element, right? The purpose of a span is to capture some text and apply properties to it, right? Span doesn't really do anything else. It doesn't look like anything or anything. In contrast to, for example, strong, which is basically bold, right? That does have visible impact. Spans are a bit like divs. They don't really show up unless you apply properties yourself. So in this case, I'm assigning an identification ID 0.2. It's not actually 0.2, it's 0.4, I suppose. That's okay. There. But, so I'm assigning that ID. I then create a rule for 0.4 and a rule for 0.1 differently. I could assign them to different colors as well. Right? But the point I'm making here with this, the list item includes the bullet, right? But the text, which is captured by the span, does not. So, if I'm applying the identification to list item, I get a colored number as well. If I apply it just to the text in the span, low density structure gets colored blue, but the number remains the same, which Honestly, if you're having multiply colored things in a list, probably the numbers themselves should be like one consistent color. But, you know, that kind of calls for judgment, and I'm just trying to teach you the basics. Does this make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, perfect, yes.
So, CSS can be included in an HTML document three ways, right? We've done one way, we've done this one and this one, right? Finally, sorry?
So we did that one first, which you said you don't like it, right?
Yep, don't do that one.
Yep.
But that's how you do it in case you ever need to. The style block goes in head. That's another way of doing it. That's fine. That's less bad, but still not preferable. The preferred way,
Is the second one.
top way.
Yeah, top right.
So we link to a style sheet. Once you, once you've written it out like this, it's actually reasonably easy to create a style sheet from this block. It's literally just copying and pasting the contents of this into another file. Nothing else changes. So, to include a CSS file, we create a link. The rel property, I'm actually not sure what rel stands for, but it specifies the type of thing you're linking to. Style sheet. And then href, standing for hyperreference, is the file name relative to the current file. If you do absolute file addressing, then basically once you try to upload this to a server, it's not going to work. So let's just make it styles.css. So you'll notice, sorry?
No, it's okay, I'm just going.
Okay. You'll notice here, as with images, styles.css is underlined. This is something that VS Code is doing for us. This is actually a link inside of VS Code. Now, we didn't create this file yet. Here's the easy way to do that. If you Control plus click, for you that will be different because you're a Mac. You'll get this dialog, unable to open styles.css, file not found. You then have a create file button.
So this is a shortcut
Yes. So basically, these are links, which, like if you click on the link, it will open the referenced file. Right? Well, control click. If the file doesn't exist, it prompts you to create it. And that's the easiest way to create it. Does that make sense? So, now that we have our styles.css file, all we need to do is copy the contents of the style block, cut, paste into our file, and we no longer need the style block. You don't have to copy the style tags themselves into the CSS file. It knows it's CSS code because it's a CSS file. Does that make sense?
And then we can remove the style tag as well, right, at the same time.
Precisely. Because, you know, another reason that you want to do this is like it just makes the file much like cleaner and simpler, you know? you noticed that we had quite a few style rules going on, and that was getting, scrolling up and down and back and forth was becoming a thing we had to do frequently. So there we go, style rules in a separate file. Refresh the page, nothing changes. Everything is being loaded correctly. And if I wanted to make some kind of minor modification, for example, change this to 15%, save, reload, right?
Yeah.
What this allows you to do is to play with your CSS rules quickly and easily while looking at the results in your actual final HTML page, which, as workflows go, that's not a bad workflow, right? Whenever you're playing with style and playing with styling properties, you must be looking at the thing that they're modifying, right? It's like a real chef tastes the soup, right? When you're designing a web page, you should be looking at the web page you're designing. Make sense?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
The original attributes in link element, the name is fixed or can change it? It is a
So-
spreadsheet. Can I say?
You mean this one?
No, style sheet.
You can link different types of things, but they're kind of beyond the scope of what we're doing here right now. But,
So the value of audio, which is a style sheet, is fixed.
yes,
Or style sheet.
correct, yes. Yeah. It does a lot of stuff. A lot of strange things. That's kind of the nice thing about doing HTML is like there is just buckets of reference material on the internet anywhere you care to look. Relationship. Rel stands for relationship. So there you go. Just kind of like a bunch of general stuff, it seems. Privacy policy gives a link to the information about the data collection and usage practices that apply to the current document. Okay. Lots of stuff, out of scope. Don't worry about it, but maybe someday you have to worry about it, Not in this class, not right now. Good.
Dr. How can we publish our website?
How can I do what?
What, publish this website?
Ooh, excellent question. You guys want to see how to actually put it up on the internet?
Just a quick reference, yes, maybe. Yeah, show it to us.
So I don't know, we will see. I hope that everybody was given CS Unix access, all of you. CS Unix, I've mentioned CS Unix, right? Did I in this class? Okay, so, okay. So we have client and server, right? In order to be visible by clients, your website must be placed on a server, right? A server is an operating system and computer that you connect to through one of a couple of different interface protocols. Like protocols other than HTTPS, right? You may have talked about it in your networking class, but So in general, we have two different protocols that we use to talk to the server, right? The first one is SSH. All right? This is secure shell. So what SSH is it's basically a Linux bash prompt which you open remotely on some other machine. The communication is handled through the network so that you enter bash commands. Those commands are executed on the remote machine. Does that make sense? The other one is either FTP or SFTP. You guys know what the S stands for. This one is File Transfer Protocol. So, when you wish to access, when you wish to make file operation, like perform, file explorer operations on the remote server, you connect to it using FTP or SFTP. In our case, our SSH connection will occur through PuTTY, which is an app. It's an application on Mohawk apps. Yours will be different. I'll tell you how to do that on Unix or Unix-like.
Okay.
Here, if you're on Windows, you will use WinSCP, which is again on Mohawk apps. If you're using Mac or Linux, the superior operating system, you will use FileZilla, like Godzilla, but with files. If you don't have that on your computer already, you will need to download and install it. It's not too bad, it's not too much. Okay, this is making sense so far? Would you like me to show you what those, I'll show you the Windows versions. Again, you all have to help individually. But it's okay, you've got terminal, and that's fine. You can actually invoke SSH directly from your terminal, So, apps anywhere. So, that's the screen. Now, so far we haven't needed the server. We technically don't have to use the server until we start writing JavaScript that sends HTTP packets back to the server, right? Once we start requiring HTTP communication between the client and server, we either need a server itself or we need to spoof one, right? At the moment, I'm choosing to show you how a real, actual, live server works. So, for example, let's take a look at PuTTY. So this is PuTTY, very wizard-like. I apologize, I can't increase the resolution on this dialog. So, your credentials for logging into the server are going to be slightly different than your Mohawk ID, but in general, the host name will be csunix.mohawkcollege.ca. Your username, in your cases, will be lowercase s, lowercase a, followed by your student number, excluding the angle braces. Your password, by default, should be SA underscore year, month, day of your birthday. But this rarely, if ever, works, and I will have to probably give each one of you a manual password reset. So, host name, csunix.mohawkcollege.ca. Port 22 is correct. Basically, just don't worry about modifying much here, but you can see that connection type has been set to SSH. If we click open, yeah, it'll complain about like certificates or something, just click through that. Log in as, this is where you enter your login name. Mine is different because I'm an instructor. I get to be known by my last name. There we go. Logged in. Let me just increase the. Unfortunately, it just like there's no way around it. It's just tiny print. But anyway, if you're in Linux, you know you're doing well. If you see this little $sign, that $sign is the most powerful symbol in all of computing. This is the bash prompt. So from here, you can sort of Linux around public HTML. These are the directories in my server account. So, on CSUnix, each one of us, me included, we all have a user account. The user account can be used to put websites on the internet. So, inside of each user account, there is a folder named public_HTML. Anything inside of that folder is accessible on the internet. Now, it also contains a private subfolder. Anything put in the private subfolder you basically need a account credentials with elevated privileges to be able to view it. None of you, like your own credentials will work on your private directory, but they won't work on anybody else's, right? So only I have access to everyone's private.
Because you're in some.
Well, I kind of need it, right? Because this is like, when we do assignments where the point is to deploy a website to the server, to a production server, that is where you're going to put it, because otherwise, you're not securing your work sufficiently against academic integrity violation, basically, because anybody can just look at your website and yank your HTML or your CSS and copy over your work, right? But if you store it in your private directory, the only person who has permission to do that is me, and I have no incentive to. So there we go. So this is an Apache server.
So we don't have a plugin. Do you guys have it?
No, we don't have it.
It's on apps everywhere.
Oh.
But you won't have it.
No, I'm using it for now.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that'll work. Buddy, just type. There it is. So, this is how it works. The server automatically generates a URL for your stuff as follows: https://csUnix.mohawkcollege.ca/tilde username. This corresponds to the public HTML folder inside of your user account on CS Unix. For example, in the case of mine, csunix.mohawkcollege.ca/tilde-more. There we go. There's a humorous picture of me as Thanos. This is a in-class example I did at some point. This is, So, if you take a look in PuTTY, I have a F2023 directory, which I used for fall 2023, right? You'll notice if I navigate to /F2023, it exists. When a directory does not have an index page, and this is what an Apache server does, it just lists the contents of the directory. So for example, if I go to section 9, and up to week 3, I've got all of these PHP files and an HTML file. If I load the HTML file, it's an HTML file. Cookies, here it is. Hello, Nick. Nick. That was an example that I did to demonstrate cookies. We'll probably talk briefly about cookies. I may even bring cookies if I remember to. But yeah, so that's basically how you access stuff on the server. Now, I'm just going to do something a little sneaky, and I'm going to check to see if you guys have accounts made for you yet, or if I need to bug IT about it. So, what's your number?
It's 000931160.
No such file or directory. Yeah. Okay. So I just need to bug IT to get you guys some accounts made on CS Unix, which I will do this week.
Okay.
Right now, you don't have access. That's okay. You don't need it yet.
Yep.
But just to demonstrate the whole thing, right? You can exit using exit. There you go. I'd like to show you the other tab now, which is WinSCP. In your case, it'll use FileZilla, which is a nicer looking application, but is fundamentally no different. You'll see a very similar connection page. Host name is already filled out for you. Log in. Yes. Asks for a username. Username is, in my case, this. Yes, authentication banner, etc. Password is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There we go. My password isn't actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is a file explorer view of your local file system. So the left hand is this machine for me. This is the server. Way out in whatever closet they have CS Unix tucked away in. Right? So, if I go to a public HTML, make a new directory, call it winter 2024, right?
Sorry, I'm just, the rights are there, are the blue X bar we learned last week
Oh yeah,
in our,
your Unix file permissions.
so you can write and
Oh, yes.
do so many things. Sorry, I just,
Yeah, no,
decided
please.
to-
Awesome. That's you're connecting, you're creating a semantic network. That's what that's called in pedagogy. And it's a very encouraged thing. So CS Unix is an Apache server. This is Unix/Linux. So of course it's using Unix style file permissions, right? So if I navigate here, maybe make another folder, call it week 2. Then, if I go into the directory that we've had our website in, right? Now I'm going to do it the bad way, and then I'm going to do it the good way, right? Drag and drop. There we go. Now, if we go to csunix.mohawkcollege.ca/winter2024/week2, which are those are the directories I just created. You'll have example1.html,
Oh,
and there it is. But where are all of our nice little styling properties?
We did not drag and drop them.
Precisely so. I didn't include them. Ta-da!
so now everybody can access it if they have the link available to them?
If you, on these machines, go to that link, you will be able to access this webpage.
Okay.
You should try it, yeah.
Yes.
This is kind of the whole point of the internet.
I cannot see.
Oh, here, let me copy it, make it bigger. How's that? And you can do that from any device too, like a mobile.
My device too.
Yeah. Anything which is connected to the internet in the same way that CS Unix is connected to the internet. If that makes sense. Yeah, it's case sensitive. It is. Yeah. Yeah, 2 ways you can take. Oh yeah, and the tilde. Sorry? Yes! It works! It works! Yeah. Oh. Enter.
Yeah,
There you go.
perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great.
So there you go. That's the internet for you.
Now it's published.
Yep, that is what you would consider a published website. I'll show you just one thing before we move along. There's a fun example in here that I'd like to show you. So, in winter 2023, Ajax examples / example 6. This is something I did as an in-class example. This is like what you can do once you have server-side programming as well. If you guys log into this, we can play tic-tac-toe. If you load this website. I'll eventually show you the code for all of this and such, but it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense until we've started talking about JavaScript and Ajax and PHP. So this is later in the course, but I thought I'd show it to you as a sort of a motivational example of what's possible with all this stuff. Cool. So this is honor system tic-tac-toe. So anybody can play as X or O at any time. Anybody can reset the game anytime they want. And there's no keeping track of turns. So if you want to move twice in a row.
No,
Okay.
real fast.
Yeah. So yeah, basically honor system tic-tac-toe. And it's got PHP. This is what PHP looks like. We will be studying PHP eventually in this course. But basically, between these three files, they open and modify a file on the server called tic-tac-toe.data, which is also this website is periodically pulling information from it. This is tic-tac-toe.data. That's all it has to be. And if you take a look in the inspection pane at the network traffic, you can see it's polling to grab the game state from the server every half second. So there's actually a half-second delay between clicking and, there it is, the send move invocation, right? So that's kind of where this goes, right? That's why there's a slight delay between when you click and this appears. But at max, it's a half-second delay minus network speeds. Sound good?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does it show who's using it right now? I'm paying here, does it shows? No?
Does it show who wins?
Who wins and who's playing right now?
Nope. The only thing literally the only thing it does is prevent people from being able to send a move to an existing spot. So I can't overwrite an X with an O. That's the only thing. You can also swap between X and O as you please. Again, this is honor system tic-tac-toe. Yeah. So that's kind of where this stuff can be heading. This uses basically no CSS. So, if I wanted to make it look pretty, I could, but I haven't bothered. Because it's not the purpose of the example. Good.
Can we take a little break?
Yes, I was just about to propose that. Let me just show you this last slide. So W3 schools is your best reference for CSS. Coloring, font styling tends to be easier in that you just apply a rule and it tends to do exactly what you want. There's kind of a combination of things tend to work pretty well out of the box, and maybe lower your expectations for what things should look like. It is possible to lose yourself in a million hours of CSS tinkering, which I don't recommend as a productive use of your time unless you're trying to learn how CSS works at a very deep level. But given the nature of this course, we're not trying to learn how anything works at a deep level. So we're content with CSS. Positioning tends to be tricky. Elements positioned relative to one another. So margin, padding, dimension, display visibility, max width, and float. These all tend to be on the trickier side of things to manage. Generally speaking, it's best to avoid margin, padding, these types of things unless you're doing something very simple. Although padding is quite useful. I'll give you a quick demo of what padding looks like. Let's say on paragraphs we add padding of 20 pixels. Right? So padding is inside the border of the object. It's like the distance between the thing inside the box and the box itself. If that makes sense? Whereas margin is the distance between that and whatever it's inside of. Right? So, yeah, basically. Any questions about that? That should be good for a rough introduction to CSS. Obviously, it gets more complicated than this, but this will at least make you functional, right?
Dr. Wu, can you show me the padding, how you use it once again?
Sure.
You just add padding, that's it,
Yep.
right?
If you want to, you can specify top, left, right, or bottom, right?
Yeah.
But if you want to do padding everywhere, it's just padding. Sounds good. Among the things that we didn't cover, topics that you may wish to look up on your own time, there are such a thing as pseudo classes. So it is possible to apply a styling rule when mousing over or hovering over an element. When you click on an element, it's possible to apply different styling. These things are additional selector rules that you can apply to provide additional styling. Second of all, there's the wild and wonderful world of CSS animations. CSS animations basically allow you to set up a timeline where different CSS style properties are slowly transitioned between, you tween together. You tween them together. I'll show you a quick example of what that looks like. So this is a good example, right? You can set CSS up to do animations like this. You can see all this is doing is it's modifying top, margin, width, and color, those three properties to create, an animation through space. Relatively easy to set these things up, but I want you to be aware that you can do this, but we're not gonna get into a lot of depth on it. for like when you mouse over something. Spinners. Keyframe animations are basically what you want to do. That's kind of cool. Click. There you go. Right? Just kind of these fun little neat things that, you know, it would be a pain to write, like in Unity, for example, which is another thing we've done animation with. Yeah, but anyway, that's also an interesting topic. But yeah, anyway, I agree. I think we should have a break. Let us suspend class for 20 minutes, which should be enough time for everyone to go down to the bins and get out. Yeah, cool. Thank you very much for your time and attention in the first half. When we get back, we'll talk about responsive design. Whoop. Uh-oh. There we go. Responsive design is very much the expectation these days. Gone are the days of, oh, my website works. It looks horrible, but it works, and there are no alternatives, so they have to use my horrible interface, right? You only get away with that these days if you're the government, which, you know, maybe you guys will be working for the government, but, you know, the government does have a monopoly on government websites, so they're usually pretty bad, you know.
Especially with CRA.
Yeah. They're normally, like, the websites from the government are normally tracking behind, like, 10 or 15 years in terms of how designs and user interfaces are done, at least. But, you know, we still love and support all of the government and all of the things the government ever says and does. Only good citizens in this classroom. So, responsive design is this principle where the website should be responsive to the platform that it's going to be put on. So, not all websites are mobile friendly. It's actually going to be kind of hard to get a non-mobile friendly website these days. I'm trying to think if I'm aware of any websites that are just horrible in terms of responsive design, which, like, I could pick apart elements of Canvas which aren't very good. Let's pick apart Canvas for a moment. So I'll let you peek behind the curtain a little bit. So this is my job, of course, that I'm teaching. Canvas has a plugin called SpeedGrader, which is like the interface through which people are marked, right? So basically, your submission is brought up, and information about the student, etc., etc. This is where I grade you, right? Now, I'd like you to see what happens if I do this at like a narrow screen width, right? See that right there?
Yeah.
I only get about, 980 pixels of width, and then I start losing items on the top, right? I lose the arrow which allows me to select the next student, right? Now you can also pull up the drop down by clicking the name, but that's tedious, and eventually that goes away too, right? Now you may be saying to yourself, who on earth would be marking somebody on a mobile device, and I would say to you, oh, not necessarily mobile devices, my friends. How about one browser on one side of your screen and the thing you're marking or something else on the other side, right? The reason to do responsive design is not just for being mobile friendly, it's also doing this. Now with Canvas, I generally have to split width-wise along the top and then along the bottom. And when I'm marking, I usually have my other monitor, right? I have my other monitor here where I have programs and stuff running on it's actually running over there. This is usually a command line interface where I'm running a grading script, which is a grading assistance script. It doesn't just grade it for me, unfortunately, but but yeah, that's bad design, right? Because we have a bunch of buttons and information in a top bar that could easily be clicked onto 2 lines. Then you still get all of your information, and all of your items are visible and accessible. Basically, this guy right here is the enemy of all good responsive design. If you have designed your website for responsive design, and you see a horizontal scroll bar, you've messed up somehow. This is your tell. You never, ever, ever want to force a mobile user to scroll horizontally. Scrolling vertically is absolutely fine, but horizontally, bad design. The only exception to that is extremely narrow widths. Widths that it's not reasonable for you to imagine anybody would really view it at that width, right? Nobody's using Nokias anymore. It's a little Nokia. Practically nobody anyway. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, imagine a website like this. How do you fit that on a phone? Right? Sometimes the websites are pretty complicated. And how to arrange something isn't always obvious, right? For example, if you go into it with the mindset, I must translate this page exactly into a mobile environment. What about this huge graphic, right? Which is just intended as a banner graphic. If you took that and you shrunk it down to the inside of a phone screen, it's going to look terrible, right? Because it'll be so tiny you won't be able to see any of this, I'm sure very expensive clip art of people in business suits doing business and smiling at the camera, right? If you want clip art of business people smiling at the camera, you should be able to actually see them, right? So, responsive design. This stuff is a little easier to figure out, right? You can stack it vertically, and you may, if you read this a little carefully, you'll notice that this is actually.
I was just noticing.
This is an example, not a real website. But
I tried to search it, but there is one, but it's not, just something else.
yeah, another bad website.
No, it's a good website actually. It's
Okay.
WPCG, Workplace Clearance Group.
Oh,
But their website is better.
.com, .eu,
.au.
AU. Uh-huh. project, okay.
No,
This is just a photo gallery. Do you think these people actually built all these houses?
No.
Somehow I don't think so.
No.
Anyway. It's not my computer, so I don't care about viruses. So there are a couple of competing approaches. These are generally resolving into the one approach which actually works the best. But let's discuss the options. So one option is to have the server detect what the requester's screen width is and issue a website made for that screen size. To do this, there's a piece of information included in the HTTP packet called the user agent string. You read the user agent string, see what kind of website, see what kind of device is attempting to load the website, send the version for that website. So the advantage of this is less computation is required by the client, right? The client has to do less work. It doesn't have to perform as many calculations to try to fit something to thing. It just receives a website that's already the correct size. In general, though, that's not the trade-off that we like to take as web designers. The clients, the end user owns the client machine. The client machine's processing is handled by the user, by the end user, by the client. The user has to pay for that hardware, right? When we are running a website, we are paying for the server. We are paying for the server hardware. The amount of processing that the server has to perform to serve the clients actually costs you money, right? This is particularly true when you're talking about cloud vendors, since very often these days you won't have an actual physical server. It's still possible to do, but startup costs, electricity, all that. Generally what's done is you rent server time from one of the major cloud vendors, right? So the amount of server time you rent is proportional to how much processing the server does. So literally any processing that you can kick out to the client saves you money on server costs. Does that make sense? Question?
Why not download everything to the client? Download all of these responsibilities to the client, so the server's basically just giving basic.
Well, it has to come from somewhere, right? There is a certain amount of infrastructure required merely to serve the website, right? But in general, the type of stuff that you do on the server is very different from the type of stuff you do on the client. Do you remember what my number one rule from last week was about clients? Number one rule about clients? Precisely. Never trust the client. Never trust the client. Never, 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 never. You would never leave something like validating login credentials or accessing the database to the client, right? Because you're just handing the keys to the kingdom to the hacker, right? So, yeah, we do respect a division of labor between the client and the server. The purpose of server-side code most of the time is to get the correct information in the website, kick the website out to the client, and perform any optional security-oriented stuff that's necessary, right? Login, validation, etc. Database access, you don't want the clients having direct access to the database, that would be a disaster. The server is the mediator between the client and the database. Does that make sense? So, but you know, a lot of stuff can be kicked out to the client, right? This is actually the purpose of JavaScript as well. JavaScript is the client-side language, and the processing that occurs in JavaScript does not incur server costs, right? So that's why that's sort of one reason you wouldn't want to use this approach, because you're spending money on the server to save the client time, and you always want to do it the other way. The other problem is that we don't necessarily want to write an entire mobile version of the website. So here's the question, right? Let's say, just for the sake of interest, you have written a version of your website to fit something like standard desktop with 1600 pixels. So you have a version for 1600 pixels. You want to do a mobile version. So you take a look at your iPhone and you see that the width of that display is 820 pixels. So you write a version of your website for that for 820 pixels. What about Android users? Right? What if an Android user has 860 pixels? You have to write another version of your website. What about if you have, maybe Nokia's come back and now suddenly you've got 640 pixels. You now have a version, you don't have a version of your website that serves 640 pixels. So you have to write another version of your website. You can see where I'm going with this. Every single screen width would have to be accommodated with a different version of your website. Basically, you are trapping yourself in development hell forever. Just like you will have to employ, if you're a manager, you have to employ actual people who do nothing but modify a website based on different pixels, just to make sure that you don't have a 5-pixel margin on one side, Not an efficient solution, right? The better solution is to write one website which scales itself dynamically to any of these widths. It's a little more tricky to set up because you're not setting up one solution, right? You're setting up a dynamic solution, right? So it's more dynamic, less static, more difficult to write the, one website does it all version. But once done, it's future-proof, right? So another version of solution to this problem, which solves it to some extent, you may have noticed that, have you ever loaded an app and said to yourself, wow, this thing is almost identical to the version on desktop that I look at through a Firefox or whatever? Well, it turns out that a lot of times you're right. Lately, there has been a tendency towards the, quote, hybrid app. Basically, it's an app which is a browser for one website. It's just a shell for the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript operating one website, right? It's a browser with most of the features removed, basically. But it gets its own custom icon, which could be important for marketing, but, marketing is other classes. So, this is okay, lots and lots of people access social media through these types of things. You know, a lot of people, when they've used social media, will tend to use the app rather than the browser in their phone to access the same thing, right? But it also requires the downloading of an app, and unless you are a social media company, if, for example, you're working for a hospital, as you know, people in this program might eventually do, are you gonna try to force people to download, like, you know, the Juravinsky Hospital app? You know, your uptake on that app is not going to be encouraging, right? People just won't download it. So, what you need then, you know, you can have this, but what you should have is a responsive website, which just does the things it needs to do to be responsive. You can have an app as well if you want, but the website itself needs to be functional as a website. So, responsive design is an approach where a web page automatically adjusts to different screen sizes. We have one set of HTML and CSS rules, and no need for app stores. Amongst many other techniques, one core technique is to use the CSS at media rule to restyle a website according to a device screen size. We will see an example of this coming up. But basically, if you include the at media, so at media is like a thing you can use to group CSS rules. Other key techniques include flex boxes and the CSS grid. So, for example, if we include at media screen and max width is some specified number of pixels, and we include CSS rules inside of this block, all of these rules will apply under those conditions. This is how you set breakpoints. This will only apply the CSS rules when the screen size goes below 600 pixels. These changes to the style could be used to override existing CSS rules. So, let's do a quick example. I'm going to make a new HTML page. Call it example2.html. Shebang. Let's make a div. Heading 3. This is div. Paragraph. I am very This is another div. I know what it means. And I quote facts, historical. From Marathon to Waterloo, go. Now, let's include a style sheet. Link relation is style sheet. href is styles2.css. Control click, create file. There we go. So, before we get too far, in general, the style properties that we want to modify for responsive design are generally layout and spatial properties, right? We don't necessarily want like background colors to change, although the system's flexible enough that you could totally do that if you wanted to. So, first let's put a box around our divs so that we can see where they are. Border is 2 pixels dotted red. Our divs. You can see they've got a little bit of a margin already. Now, let's make it so that at wide screen widths, this thing is basically chopped in half so that we have them both side by side. This, incidentally, is what the nominal screen, like this is without having zoomed in. But it's a little bit for the sake of our poor eyes. So, width is 49%. There we go. Good. Oh, I forget the property for it now. I kind of wanted like let's try that. So. With this div, let's give it ID first, and give this one ID second. So the first div has ID first, and the second has ID second. First loads left. Second loads right.
I think there must be second one.
Oh, it's actually only necessary on the ones, like, if it's not the last one, then it's necessary. The last one, it's not strictly necessary, but you're right, for consistency, it should be on word. So, there we go. There we go. So we can see we have these two divs which are floating left and right. Right? Left, left. Watch what happens as we narrow the view. Text is getting crunched up, and crunched up, and crunch, 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 crunch. And then we have this weirdness going on. Right? So, at some point, say around here, let's say 825, what we want to do is we want to stop that, stop the float, pop them to being one above the other. Make sense? So, media, let's, let me pull in there we go. Media screen, and max width is 825 pixels. We copy and paste the same CSS rules, but rather than having them float left and right, we turn it off, float none. As these things were stacking up correctly when we started. Make sense? In this case, we're almost like designing the website to go side by side in widescreen mode rather than like designing it mobile first. In general, well, actually no, yeah, that is an example of mobile first. So another design principle for websites these days is mobile first design. The first thing you worry about looking good is the phone version. Then, once you've got the phone version working and everything looks nice, then you worry about desktop, right? Most of your customers will be looking at your website through a phone, so that's where you want to spend most of your attention. So, let's save that and see how it works. Reload the page. There we go. Approaching our breakpoint. Now, this is still not good because when you snap this way, you also want to fill the page, right? So, in our CSS, we can simply copy the rule for all divs of this type. Like in a real one, you use like many different types of divs, so you put a class on this, but this is a simple example, right? Change width to 100 rather than 48, and I don't know, let's pick a nice word. And make it dashed. 4 pixels. Just to emphasize the transition. So now, when we pull in to our past our breakpoint, you can see the different CSS style rules have been applied. use other ones to like center the text and stuff. Cool? Make sense? So, by setting the breakpoints based on when this information on the website looks good or bad, we have covered all possible screen widths. There is a point at which it becomes a bit ridiculous. You know, at like sub 150, it's very like crunched together. But even at 150, that doesn't look, like that's not unreadable, right? Make sense?
Yep.
So that's how you use app media. Any questions?
Can you see
The coding? So basically, you have your default rules, right? Those will apply when this hasn't been activated. Once this activates, these rules override those ones. Again, cascading style sheets. Can you reload the page? Oh. Spelling mistake. Sorry? Oh, yep, I can pull up the HTML for sure. Anyone making modifications? go. Make sense? Do you want me to go back to the code? The HTML or the CSS? So, yeah,
So why did you change, ID to class?
IDs are unique. Only one thing on an HTML page may have an ID, but multiple things may have the same class. So in this case, I wanted these divs to be on the one side and these divs to be on the other side, but I couldn't duplicate ID, right? So I changed ID to class, and then everything worked.
So the name of ID should be just a one unique name in the whole HTML.
Precisely so.
So the long way to do it would be to have a different ID for each.
Yes. The long way to do it would be to have a different ID for each, and at that point you're working against yourself because that level of duplication will also be required in the CSS file. And the whole point of the CSS is to try to minimize that kind of duplication. Does that make sense? Cool.
Can you go back to the CSS?
Sure. I just picked a color here using the color picker. You can pick whatever you want, that doesn't matter. Okay, are we ready to move on? So, one example of responsive design done well. This website, which is html5rocks.com, you have all of these different divs, essentially, all providing different links and information, which, when popped over to the mobile version, first of all, obviously it's all stacked up so that it can be read nicely. But here are here are a few other things, right? We have navigation links at the top, right? The speed grader problem I showed you. If you keep everything lined up horizontally like that, it's going to look terrible. You will introduce the horizontal scroll bar of doom. Doom! So, nav links are no longer horizontal. They are a cluster of links at the top, which occupy multiple lines, right? So that's good. Another thing that you will often see that replaced with on a mobile website is a drop-down menu, right? You know the little menu icon that you get in the corner these days? You then get a drop-down list of all of those link options. That's the other way that it's typically done these days. Notice also that many of the logos have been removed. Logos are often, I won't say they just fill space, but they do fill space, and they're not necessarily what you're going for on a mobile site, right? Particularly if they're just like infographics and stuff that fills space. Logos have largely been removed. Columns stacked vertically, large text panels removed. So, and you'll notice also the margins and the padding have been played with, right? So that is a good one. In fact, let's see if we, seems I've been redirected. That's okay. There you go. Like, the problem with not removing those logos or doing something with them is that they end up occupying most of your screen on mobile, which minimally you'd probably want to shrink it down and put it to the side or something, you know, but it is what it is. So I've been doing this whole time, but a very good way of testing mobile screen widths is to use your inspector pane and slide that along, and that'll give you a dynamic view. Basically, that way you can test all screen widths just by clicking and dragging. There are also developer tools that can help you with this, such as Firebug, which is an extension for Firefox. So, you may be saying to yourself, good golly, this sounds like a lot of work. And being a person who likes to do as little work when as I can, where I can help it on things that don't interest me, perhaps there is some assistance that might be gathered for all of this stuff which seems quite fiddly. Because it is. All of this stuff is very fiddly. Introduce front-end frameworks. A front-end framework, in this case we will be talking about Bootstrap, is a way of including other people's style rules in your website. You don't have to pay for them. They are freely available on the internet because open source, hooray. So they mean that we don't have to reinvent the wheel on a lot of these operations. They give us a common language that we can solve problems with that, like, everybody knows what you're talking about when you're talking about it. So let's talk about Bootstrap particularly. So, in the Google, if you type get Bootstrap, you are directed to getbootstrap.com, the most popular HTML, CSS, and JavaScript library on the internet. There we go. Bootstrap. Build fast, responsive sites with Bootstrap. Boom. Let us create yet a third example page. Let's call this Bootstrap example.html. If you're good with Bootstrap, you don't actually have to write any CS rules hardly at all. Now, insert our thing. So there are two ways to get Bootstrap. The first is to properly download and install the packages, which is probably something you would only do if you were administering a server. The other alternative is to use what is called the Content Delivery Network, or CDN. The Content Delivery Network basically is a series of servers placed all throughout the world at, like, you know, typical hubs, internet nodes and hubs, which will serve and issue the updated bootstrap files, which are used by your website, if you choose to use them. Incidentally, does anybody know where our closest internet node is? You'd think so, but no.
New York?
Nope. It's closer than New York. Oh, I'm sure New York has one as well.
Buffalo?
Nope.
Hamilton?
What's that? What'd you say? Not Washington, no. Waterloo. Kitchener Waterloo. Yep. Yep. University of Waterloo actually has like the Waterloo Computer Science Club, which is like, it's a huge network node, Waterloo, for like the larger internet. To the point where if you have various permissions turned off on your various apps for like location data and that sort of thing, apps expecting location data will often default to Kitchener. I don't know if anybody's noticed this, but the reason that it's defaulting to Kitchener, you've noticed this, right? The reason that it's defaulting to Kitchener is because that's where the node is, and it knows where the node is. It can't identify you through like your particular subnode, so it hops up one level in the hierarchy to like the larger node in Kitchener, and it says, oh, you're probably close enough to Kitchener that if I say Kitchener, then you'll be like, no, but yeah, right? So yeah, so that's the reason. Anyway, so the Content Delivery Network is not too bad to use. All you have to do is copy and paste these rather long links, and suddenly, magically, you have Bootstrap available to you. So let's do that. Copy, include via CDN. There's a little copy to clipboard button right there. Copy, paste that into your head, and do the same with the other one. One's for CSS, one's for JavaScript, but you know, include both. Copy, paste, copy, paste. There we go. So, oh, okay. There's one thing before we go much further. Did you know that HTML has a comment character? So if you want to comment something out in HTML, it's exclamation point dash dash, and then you put everything in there and you end it, and that's a comment. So I just want to, actually, the content here will probably be just fine. I'll put a heading on it. So, this is what the website looks like prior to including Bootstrap. After installing Bootstrap, don't fail on me now. Wow, that's really anticlimactic. Oh, there it is. But did it fail to load? I think it just failed to load. Yeah, failed to load resource. Oh, there it goes. Sometimes the content delivery network just doesn't work. So that's when the content delivery network doesn't work, it normally, if you refresh the page, it doesn't work. So, you know, it's great until it breaks, and then you just refresh. Anyway, so you notice that the font has changed, and the size of things has changed. The thing looks a little bit nicer even just from having loaded Bootstrap, having done nothing else to the whole thing, right? So, so let's explore the Bootstrap grid system. Let's say, just for the sake of interest, that I had a, like an address bar type thing, or a navigation bar. A div with a lot of little divs in it. Alright. I need the name of a fruit.
Kiwi.
Kiwi. Next.
Mango.
Mango. Next.
Banana.
Banana. Oh. Next.
Strawberry.
Strawberry. Next. Pineapple. Somebody else can definitely say a fruit if they want to.
I'm almost done with my fruit salads.
What's a fruit?
Apple.
Apple. I want a lot, this is kind of the point. Fruit? Blueberry. Fruit?
Orange.
Oh, nice.
Fruit?
For me, I would say papaya.
Oh, fruit?
Grape.
Grape. Fruit?
Watermelon.
Fruit?
Cantaloupe.
I spelled that correctly. Do a couple more. I know this seems like a lot of fruit, but it isn't actually.
Tomato.
Tomato. You say tomato, I say tomato.
Peach.
Peach, very good.
Pomegranate.
Pomegranate.
Yeah.
And round us off with,
Pear.
all right. So, we wish to construct a nav bar, the way that Bootstrap works is by including HTML elements in one of a set of special Bootstrap classes. So we've been defining our own classes so far. Bootstrap basically is a bunch of classes that came with Bootstrap. So to use Bootstrap, you apply classes to HTML elements. The one that we're interested in at the moment is container. When creating a container, we are creating a flexible grid system. I know you're not supposed to, but I'm going to include some inline styling, just to be able to differentiate things. Border will be 2 pixel solid black. So the way that the grid system works set up a div, which is a container. Doesn't have to be divs, but divs are what our design, this is designed for. So you then have a series of sub-containers constituting rows. Inside of these, you then set up columns. In our case, each of these is going to be a fruit. Bootstrap will automatically calculate how much width each one of these pieces of text needs and bump this to include another line as needed. So, let's see how it works. So, we have a div for the container overall. We then have a div of class row. All of the elements in the row need to go in that div. And we can just kind of tab this over to make it look nice. So we can already see that our container is centered in the screen and has a few breakpoints where it swaps between different widths. But so far, nothing's really going on with these guys yet. If we include class column, you see we get a very different effect. I'm just going to pop in some quick styling rules to be able to view the rows and columns differently. So, style. To container, I want to apply this guy here. And then margin of 2 pixels and a border or padding of 2 pixels. Then write a rule for row, border 2 pixels, dotted blue, similar margin and padding. And then for column, margin and padding might screw things up. We'll see. We shall see. That's actually pretty good. That gives us a good view. So, as things narrow, somehow we've lost the oh, I know. Let's not modify margin on the container. That's what's keeping it centered. Margin auto is centering on a div. There we go. So, we can see how, okay. Let me point out some of what's going on here. So, all of these items, which have been specified as columns, are all contained within this one row. Notice that everything's in this one row, right? If I zoom out completely, and there's no space restrictions, everything is all on one line, right? Which is the way that you would expect a nav bar to be. As we narrow the screen width, and there's suddenly a bit less space, you can see that certain items are being popped down to the next row. Now, you'll notice here, in some cases, the div is larger than all of the other divs when the word is longer. But in others, like Kiwi, we have this extra space at the end. So why is it doing that and what's it doing, right? Well, basically, it automatically divides the space up by 12. 12 is its kind of cardinal number that it tries to divide everything by. It sets the minimum width, you know, within some tolerances. It sets a kind of a minimum width to be approximately that column size, right? Or that, whatever the width is divided by 12. And then it sort of fudges, borrows, and steals to try to fit in these longer words by making some of them larger at the expense of other ones, right? But in the end, the effect is we have all of our words there. They look reasonably well. That's not an issue, right? Just to make this point a little further, let me add another row. So in this row, I shall have exactly 12 items. So up to tomato. And I shall make each of them a single character. So you can see there's our second, and you can see how when it has to put 3 things on a row, it's spacing those out according to the grid system divided by 3, right? Roughly speaking, it tries to keep lined up to the grid system, but it will fudge things. And when things get too narrow, even for this, it will itself still split onto secondary rows. The only limiting factor here is when the screen width is so small that you can't even fit the word watermelon on the screen. But again, that's kind of, you don't really have to worry about resolutions that small because nobody's viewing these things on an old Game Boy. But yeah, so that is responsive design, folks. Absolutely. Do you want to see the CSS?
Yeah.
The purpose of the CSS was just to like draw some boundaries, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to see any of these divs. So, because the border on a div is by default like colorless. So that's mostly what the point is. The margin and padding is just to separate them a little so that they can be clearly seen. So, the way that this is being done is very similar to that HTML website that we saw. On that HTML website, you had things that looked like this, right? That got translated into something like that, right? So there are definitely rows going on here, right? We're evenly dividing the 12 columns to form larger divs, right? Now, it turns out that if you just leave it like this and say, give me 3 divs, or give me 3 columns, that's the emergency test.
Attention. Security is testing the college's emergency notification system. This system is used in the event of a college lockdown.
Do you think it's safe to start talking again?
Lockdown, lockdown, lockdown. Go to a place of safety now.
It just
Do we have a
finish the computer.
It's like a first movie.
Lockdown, lockdown,
Test
lockdown.
movie.
Go to a place of safety
In my
now.
happy place, I'm in my happy place, I'm in my happy place, I'm in my happy place. They certainly picked
Lockdown,
on obnoxious enough porn,
lockdown.
didn't
Go to a place of safety now.
It's probably a lot of threats are going on around colleges and schools. Last summer was like, so many schools were in lockdown.
they?
It's awful airborne.
So, I don't
I
know.
would have preferred an air raid
In the
siren.
event of a lockdown emergency, consider one of these actions. Get out. Evacuate if you can. Hide. If you can't evacuate, hide, barricading yourself. Fight. If you can't get out or hide, be prepared to fight. Fighting is the last resort. Once the emergency is over, the following sound will be played across the PA system.
Attention please, this is calling security. The emergency situation has ended. You are free to return to your classes or offices. Calling security is now conducting a room-to-room confirmation of this announcement. Attention please, this is calling security. The emergency situation has ended. You are free to return to your classes or offices. Calling security is now conducting a room-to-room confirmation of this announcement. Attention please, this is calling security. The emergency situation has ended. You are free to return to your classes or offices. Calling security is now conducting a room-to-room confirmation of this announcement.
Somehow I don't think I'm quite, ready. I don't think I'm ready to return to my class. That was so rudely interrupted.
We have 5 minutes, so.
How we do?
You are encouraged to sign up for Mohawk Sam on My Mohawk to receive emergency notifications directly to your cell phone.
It
This
doesn't work.
includes securities testing. Thank you.
Where were we? Oh yeah. So basically, if you want to do unequal columns, you can actually specify the columns. So you can do, for example, -6, -3, -3. You try to make it add up to 12, right? But if you do that, Oh, the borders have gone because it's like the wrong thing now. But you can see how that's in line with like 6, 3, and 3, right? So you can modify layout that way, and it remains responsive. So it'll only pop it to the next line if the text is exceeding the boundaries of the box, which is actually something that's relatively tricky to test for yourself in terms of code. So this is nice. This is a very nice package. Yeah. Cool. Well, I don't think there's anything more that I can cover in 4 minutes because I have to start a new topic.
Can you tell us about the programming class?
Yeah. Somehow I thought that would come up yet. Well, I can guarantee that there won't be any CSS or HTML on it.
Can you upload these, Dr. Mark, to the
Yeah.
week 2?
Yep, absolutely. I will do that right now. So, what do you think? Is this class still fun? Yeah? Still better than fundamentals? Good.
Dr. Bora, I have a question. Usually, those GoDaddy and those website, whatever that is, they already have some templates, right, to use. So, but this will help us to design from scratch, right?
Oh, templates. Yeah, you mean like WordPress and stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the thing about like websites like WordPress, like yeah, they do contain like templates and add-ons and things to try to help non-programmers to do this sort of thing. I want to say something like if you are employed to do this, the expectation is not that you're just going to use a WordPress site, right? Yeah, the expectation will be that you have the ability to build a website from scratch. Yeah. Well, scratch. Like it depends on whether you consider like bootstrap scratch. It's like swiftly being considered scratch. You know, like there is a set of tools that you use to aid in website design, but you know. Basically, if you're not working in raw code, you're not a programmer. Yeah, but yeah, like the whole game of like providing widgets and making a website that way is, man, it's very old. It's been going on like for a long time, all the way back to GeoCities, and earlier than that as well. There's stuff that you can't do, right? Like, so far, we've been like we're only just starting to get into stuff that reasonably you wouldn't use a WordPress site for, you know? Like, if all you're doing is like basic HTML stuff, you probably don't even need to do that, right? You can just use some other package. But once we start talking about JavaScript in particular, you're swiftly passing out of the realms where these sort of pre-built packages will be of much use to you. Yeah. Does that make sense? Is this the right? Yeah, this is the right. Create a file. There we go. Uploaded.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, you can sort of see how you can do like image galleries